So due to COVID-19, the June PFA board meeting will be held via Zoom. Individuals who wish to make comments regarding items scheduled on the agenda or wish to address the PFA board during public comment on items not specifically scheduled on the agenda must use the Q&A option within the meeting or send comments to publiccomment@poudre-fire.org. Your comments and questions will be read by a moderator and answered by the board. Okay, and with that, we will, I'll call the meeting to order and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. So we will start with public comment, and I don't know if there is any public comment that came up in the Q&A.
No Q&A and no email either at this point.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Kirsten. And so we'll move on to our first discussion item, which is the PFA agenda planning calendar. So I don't know if there are any comments to make on this or anybody has any additions they wanted to make to this calendar.
Just, you know, this keeps us transparent of what's coming up. And if you look in just a couple of short months, we will be submitting our preliminary budget. And Ann is working closely with Travis Stornan at the city to understand what that will look like going into 21. So that's when we will begin those discussions. Also next month, we have the Chief's mid-year performance review, which in our, I just want to make sure the board is comfortable with last year. It was didn't have a submittal of any kind. We just had an informal discussion, executive session between the chief and the board. And we will continue through each month and probably until there's a vaccine or some kind of cure, we will continue the COVID-19 updates because they're going to impact us. And then today we will go into executive session to talk about the collective bargaining agreement, and then ratification will come in July, and that's what we anticipate from Local 1945 as well, after they finish their education portions to their members. And August is the reforming of the board, and that's you know, kind of the highlights in case, but we're here if anybody has any additions they want to put on there.
Does anybody have any additions that they want to add to the calendar?
No.
No. Okay. Seeing none, then we will move on to the consent agenda, which is the Poudre Fire Authority board minutes and the agreement to allow discharge of drainage into Pleasant Valley and Lake Canal Company's ditch.
Kristen, I have a question. I don't know when the appropriate time to bring that up.
I think now would be fine. Sure.
Tom, there's a statement in there about water quality going into the ditch. And do we have a plan to assure the water quality? I mean, I can imagine us burning stuff and then spraying water on it and it going, not having all that good a quality, but there's some statement in there about us having to maintain the quality of the water.
Chief McLean, can you respond to that?
Sorry, I'm trying to unclick my stuff. I apologize, I don't have the specific information around how we're measuring water quality. We did complete a comprehensive water reclamation project under the state guidance as part of this project. We had to update the way we are retaining and holding water, and that was all approved by the state and through our contractor as we did that work. If there's specific information on water testing, I could sure look into that. Really, the water that flows out of there will not have high quality or a high quantity of particulate or any kind of chemicals. In our new burn building that is completed now, It burns just dimensional lumber, so it's just wood. And that there is some drainage that comes out of there with some ash and soot. But they designed that so that it would be retained in the pond appropriately under the requirements of the state, and so that it can settle before it moves into the ditch. That information has been shared with our attorneys and with the attorneys from Colorado State University, who we have the lease with for the property, as well as the people who own the ditch company. And everybody seems to be okay and in agreement with the project that we have and where it is right now. But I can sure ask for specific information from Chief DeBear. I'm not sure if he's on either, and don't want to just throw this at him without him knowing, but we can get that information and get back to you. Any specific?
No, I don't need it. I just wondered what we were doing, and it sounds like you have a plan. And I do want to ask, though, do we use foam? We're not going to get into this PFAS thing, are we, with like they did in Southern Colorado?
No, we don't use PFAs. It's kind of weird saying it in this meeting, but we don't use PFAS, as they're commonly called, in any of our training scenarios. We only use Class A foam, which is very, very similar to soap. It's a surfactant, and being in a meeting probably almost a year ago, last fall, when we met, there was the civil engineering, as Chief McLean stated, with the state's reclamation part of that water, changing it from a detention pond to a retention pond, right? Or the other way around. But it provides for the appropriate settling and filtration. We're having to install a sprinkler system and grass for the area that aids in that. It's all been designed by civil engineers to meet those requirements.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question, Dave. So are there any other questions or comments before we look for a motion for the consent agenda? Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right. There's been a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any other discussion before we vote? All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Darren, did you say aye?
I did.
Okay. So
Aye.
Motion passes, and we will move on to staff reports. The first one being the COVID update.
All right, I'm going to turn this over to Chief Vanderbilt and Ann Turnquist here briefly. Just as I said earlier, this is going to be something we're going to keep you updated on until we have a vaccine or a cure. As you know, there are some states that are seeing extensive increases in infections. Our neighbors to the west in Utah are seeing nearly 1,000 new cases a day, and their ICU beds are starting to hit capacity, and that's what we're trying to prevent here with the Safer at Home, which it soon becomes Protect Your Neighbor initiative from the governor. And Colorado has been doing, compared to other states, have been doing a good job. There is, my understanding, we've stayed pretty flat at the bottom, whatever the inverse of a plateau is. We've stayed pretty flat at the bottom, but we're watching some outbreaks throughout the state that are all fairly small, but they are considered outbreaks nonetheless. We changed, just to give you a synopsis, we changed our dispatch early in this to identify possible COVID-19 risk. We still work at that. We changed our response, and Chief Vanderbilt will talk. We've changed our response back to where we are entering more of those homes, people possibly with COVID. We keep up on PPE. Chief DeBar works on that daily. His staff works on that to keep us up on PPE and projecting into the future. We've done a lot of things in the stations. Our people are wearing masks in the stations, and kudos to them. That's a 48-hour shift, and when they're with each other, they have their masks on. So that you know how it is when you just go to the grocery store and stuff, and you think about working in that kind of environment. But I heard a thing yesterday that without without a vaccine, without a cure, the only thing we have is prevention. That's all we have left. We don't have anything else to do that. So we have to work in the world of prevention. We're working hard with our folks, trying to keep any kind of outbreaks from happening inside. HR has been cruising along with some changes to add benefits to our employees to help get us through this. And we're still at the ready should this thing break out again. And then probably the thing that has really worked really well is our incident management team, and under our incident commander, Chief Vandervelde, working with our plans chief, Chief Butler, to put this together. We are standing that down and getting back into more normal operations with the ability to stand that up at any moment. So to go into our sustainability and where we are in getting closer back to normal, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Vandy, and then we'll turn it over to Ann to talk about finance.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for giving me this chance to talk about this. So we're about 1 month into our sustainability phase 1, and things are really going well. We have initiated a standing incident action plan, where we used to have one that we put out every day, then every 2 days, then we went to 6 days. So now we have a standing plan that we're all following, and so we really want to be consistent with our missions, the safety of our personnel. So what we've done with our incident management team, we haven't disbanded it, but what we do is we meet every Wednesday now, and just make sure that we're keeping up with any changes. I believe the governor is going to announce some changes today, so we really want to make sure we capture all those and keep us on the forefront of this. So as Chief said, from a response standpoint, we discontinued the staging on the calls. So first arriving unit's going to go in. Our personnel are still wearing the PPE appropriate for COVID-19. And we're still trying to minimize the number of our first responders and our firefighters, minimize that close contact with people unless it's needed. So some of the other things that we've done is we had 4 stations, station 2, 3, 5, and 7, that didn't really have dorm rooms that they could close the door and take their mask off to sleep. So we've installed some curtains, so that way they don't have to sleep in their mask also, which that happened last week or 2 weeks ago. But still facial coverings in the station, social distancing, people are practicing, and I do have to put some kudos out to all of our firefighters. They've done a fantastic job. I think there's success in the prevention. So we still have had 3 people positive cases, and this was early on in the event. So kudos to all of them, because they're really practicing all the items that we're asking them to do. And so we increased our training classes by numbers, so we can have up to 25 attendees. As today we have a trench rescue training going on, so we can have up to 25 people out there. The classrooms that we have are up to about 50% capacity that we can out at the training center. And again, we just continue to monitor and identify some of the practices that could change, such as we're looking at off-duty workouts. So if our firefighters want to, because they don't have a place to work out, so if they can come in and work off-duty in the stations. We're looking at visits from family members, and the facial wearing of the masks. So we continue to monitor that, but with the disease, nothing has changed. So we're really staying right where we're at until something changes with it. And the other part, I got to give a lot of kudos to our logistics group and our planning group. Our PPE levels are still remaining at good levels. We are really watching all of the ordering and how we can keep it up. So we're just really in a good place, and everybody's doing a great job. So.
Great, thank you. That's good to hear. Tom, did you say, did anybody
Yeah.
have any questions for Chief Vandervelde?
Okay, we're ready for
I
Ann
guess
to
we'll-
talk about
I
finance.
guess Ann will talk about money now.
Yeah. So just as things are evening out on the response side, of course, the finance side is looking less promising as we're seeing the impact. That'll be a long-term impact on our finances. What we talked about yesterday with the district is about the property taxes coming in. June 15th was the day we had been waiting for. That was the due date for all the property taxes, no matter whether you were paying in 2 installments or 1, everything was due June 15th. The district's revenue at this point is at 94% of what was budgeted, which is it's good, but that 6% is about $500,000 short of what we had budgeted for the district's contribution to PFA for 2020. We're still looking at this as perhaps a timing issue. A couple of weeks ago, the governor signed a bill that the legislature put through to allow counties to excuse people's delinquency interest payments. So that means if people didn't pay on time by June 15th, they would be paying a smaller amount of interest on their delinquent payments. Luckily, they didn't do that until the 14th, which is really just right before the deadline. So people didn't have a lot of time to say, "Oh, good, I'm not going to pay, even though I could." But it does mean that we may not see some of the deposits from the district coming in until later this year, and we don't know how long later. What the county tells us is that they'll be doing delinquency notices in July for those people who haven't paid their property taxes or haven't paid them in full. And they expect that will spur some people to go ahead and pay. And then, of course, the normal process is that your property goes to the tax lien sale come October if you haven't paid your taxes, which will spur some other people to go ahead and pay rather than have their property go to the tax lien sale. So we're going to continue to watch that, but right now we're treating it as a potential issue for the fourth quarter. The district is going to have enough money they've already paid PFA their first and second quarter payments. The third quarter payment, the district will have enough money to pay the third quarter payment. The fourth quarter is where we're concerned that whether we'll have enough revenue from the property taxes to make that full payment. The other thing that we're watching is specific ownership tax, which is the sales and use tax on vehicles. And PFA, or the district, gets some revenue from that. That's coming in about 20% below normal, which makes sense. People aren't buying as many cars. And so we projected that out for the rest of the year as being potentially another $120,000 short of what we expected or what we budgeted for. So, in total, that's about $620,000 or about 7.7% lower than the contribution that was expected from the district. But again, that may just be a timing issue, and we'll continue to watch that. We talked yesterday about not really needing to do anything from the district's perspective yet. The district does have some funds in reserves, revenue reserves and contingency reserves, plus a little bit of money that the district saved because they did not conduct an election this year. So there is some money to backfill with if need be. And the ultimate solution may be that the district doesn't make its full contribution this year. But again, we'll wait and see on that. City revenues so the other partner in PFA is at this point, we have not seen any reduction in our 2020 contributions from the city. We are starting to turn our sights towards 2021 though, as the city begins to work on its 2021 budget. We're using a working number of 8% below previous year's revenue from the sales and use tax portion of our contribution from the city, which is just short of $1 million. And then we also think that some of our property taxes from the city side may be at risk as well for the same reasons they're at risk with the district. If people aren't able to pay, there may be a timing issue. Eventually we get those payments because that's what the tax lien sale does, but that's potentially far down the road. And we certainly hope that doesn't happen to folks, but it definitely could be a timing issue for us. So, we don't really need any action out of this board at this point either. We just want you to know that we're continuing to do those cost measures that we talked about last, hiring freezes and delaying some capital projects and those kind of things, because unfortunately the worst is yet to come on the finances. And we especially don't know what happens if we have another dip, another flare up of COVID in the community and state. So we continue to watch this, and as we start to work on our budget for 2021 in July, we'll be doing a lot of modeling and scenarios that assume best case and worst case funding from both the city and the district. And we'll definitely be back talking to you as we work our way through that.
Thanks, Anne. Any questions for Anne about her report? I mean, I know there's a lot of wait and see, and I know there'll be a lot of work to do with the modeling and the different scenarios in July but I appreciate kind of having a heads up on I mean, I don't think it's surprising for anyone, and I'm sorry you have to be the bearer of some fairly bleak news, but we can figure this out, and it's good to kind of have have the update and have our mindset around what we might have to look at in the future.
Yeah. The other thing that I didn't mention is, of course, we talked about last time, we're sitting on some pretty good reserves because
Right.
of the uncertainty we had about KFCG in the past, and that uncertainty has been taken away. So although KFCG revenue, of course, will be lower, as all other revenue is lower, but that's a good safety net for PFA to have, and we'll be talking to you about that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And looking at the reserves and how quickly we could, pay those back, and I think will be important. That's what, as we look at that in the city too, is, it's okay to use your reserves, and this is clearly the rainy day that we may have been saving for. And so, but then how quickly we can replenish those reserves and is important to look at too. So.
Yeah, as a reminder, some of those reserves are some of our bigger capital projects that we have coming up.
Right.
It also, though, that's the discussion as we move forward. It's a level of service issue, and suffering through the capital. I mean, we've borrowed from capital before, and we just start getting balanced from that, and then we get hit with this, but. This board has worked very hard with staff, but a lot of push from this board over the last 8 or 9 years to use our underspend to build those reserves, which has been, I think, beneficial to get us into the position where we can say, hey, there is this option. So,
Great. So, any other comments or suggestions on the COVID update regarding finances? Well, thank you, Anne. And we'll move on to the legislative update then.
This will be pretty brief. Speaking of finances, I think most of the board is aware that the Gallagher Amendment is going to the voters in November to remove the setting of the residential assessment rate. So what we believe that means by looking at it is that it will be fixed at 715 should the voters approve it. Of course, there's going to be some significant opposition that's already being mounted, and I'm trying to meet who we met with. But at the state chief's level, we were told that the campaign against it's going to be, this is actually a tax increase because your property values are going to go up, and Gallagher was designed for that rate to go down to prevent any untoward financial burden on the residential part of the property taxes. However, this will remove it. The legislature will still have the ability to reduce the residential assessment rate under this change. They will not be able to, because the Tabor, be able to raise it. The good thing is, though, with our partners at the city, who, our district partners de-Gallagherized 2 years ago, or actually they did a Tabor election that allows the mill rate to go up to maintain what a 7.2% RAR would be. So with this at the city side, that would presumably lock that in at 7.15. If not, if this doesn't pass, then the residential assessment rate is headed to what appears to be 5.88, which is a 17% drop. And that's due in part to oil and gas, the decline in the value of oil and gas, and also the decline in the value of commercial property. What we've been told is the commercial property across the state was devalued by about 20% at the beginning of COVID. And with changes of learning the Zoom environment, and our district board chair and I had a meeting last week, and he's talking about how a lot of businesses he's talked to said, hey, we're learning to live in this Zoom environment, and we may be turning over some of our properties because we don't need that anymore. So that could also have an impact on commercial properties, which would have an impact on that residential assessment rate. So we're watching that closely, but this has passed, and it will be on the November ballot. So the Gallagher thing is going to become more. We'll probably hear a lot about it in the TV campaigns as they come on. There was a couple of bills that passed on wildfire mitigation risk, which we believe are good, that can help our neighbors in our wildland urban interface areas do some modifications to fuels. And it was good to see that get past appropriations. One of the things I told the district board yesterday is usually the way this last legislative session kind of shook out is usually bills go to the Veterans Affairs Committee to die. This session, things were going to appropriations to die. Usually things go to appropriations. It's a good sign for a bill, but with this year, that changed a lot with the budgetary restrictions the state has. Another good news item bill that passed is the slow down and move over for any official vehicle. They just put meat into and give a prescription for law enforcement officials to be able to judge when someone has violated the law. Late last week, we had another police officer and firefighter struck in the traffic way. So it's always been my biggest fear. Don't have a lot of them, but it's a substantial fear for our people out in the traffic ways, and people are looking around trying to see the accident and all that. Even with all our warning devices and our reflective gear and stuff, it's still a very dangerous place for our firefighters to be, along with law enforcement officers, tow truck drivers. So we're doing everything we can to prevent that. And then there was a proposal for workers' compensation for COVID-19 for all frontline workers. That died because of appropriations, because of the unfunded mandate that would create. So when they come back, there will still be some COVID remnants, I would say, even if we have a vaccine and a cure when the legislature comes back next year. So that could come back as well. One of the things we know in the fire service is, at least in Colorado, and I don't know the latest update, but as of a week ago, we still had not had any firefighters that had sustained anywhere in the state a severe illness that was debilitating to the point of not being able to return to work. So we're watching that part, and that's pretty much it for the abbreviated legislative docket that they had.
Well, thanks, Chief. Anybody have any questions or comments about the legislative update? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the dashboard review. Is there a presentation for that?
Yes, Chief Sims has a brief presentation for that.
Okay, great.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, the strategic board strategic plan dashboard, really has a COVID-19 theme to it, right? When we presented to you in January, we had lots of goals that we were planning on taking action on. And a lot of our attention is going to be turning towards goal number 6, which is foster an environment of fiscal responsibility at all levels. And goal number 7, which is plan for long-term issues and demands that will shape the future of the authority and its governance structure. I'm not going to belabor the economic impacts of COVID-19 and some of the things that Ann covered so well. I just think that a lot of our work that we put into the plan with SMART goals is going to be moving forward with that. In the operations division and from the planning standpoint, we did complete several things. We did complete the community risk assessment and standard of cover, which the board approved in March. We submitted that to our Center for Public Safety Excellence peer team. We're working through that process with them right now. And that really improved our work or continued our work on goal number 3, which is in special operations. The special operations battalion chief, Battalion Chief Jeff Butler was assigned. And the bulk of Jeff's work really is kind of getting up to speed with working with the captains in those programs, but then also he became the planning section chief for the COVID event. And a lot of his work was spent on that. Chief Vandervelde, myself, and Chief Butler will get together and have a meeting to discuss that goal, because that is still a goal that we're not so much as behind on anymore. We're just kind of moving in a different direction. So we're going to meet on that. In the support division, a lot of the items that were slated to be accomplished in this 6-month time period was tied to capital funding. Some of the things that we discussed, projects out at the training facility, Station 6, and adding some personnel into there. A lot of that has been put on hold to look at the finances for the future of the authority. Goal number 2 is still, most of the objectives within that are complete, and Chief Waters and the EMS battalion continue to work with UC Health on the board extended the contract in May for another year, and they'll continue to work towards that next iteration of that for 2021. So things are functioning really well there. Fire prevention and community risk reduction. Again, the community risk reduction manager worked closely with the planning team and the division chief of operations on the community risk assessment standards of cover, and all the work that's being done for us to, like Chief DeMint said, prevention first before we respond. Goal number 4 is still a little bit in limbo, as Division Chief Howell has been working on the COVID-19 IMT, as well as the impacts in the community with some of the changes that have occurred with restaurants opening up into the streets, working with we had said earlier, our last meeting, that the plans continue to come in and development kind of continues to move forward. So that work continues. And then in administration, again, the accreditation piece, finance and HR, there were several accomplishments. However, the bulk of the work moving forward is going to be in that finance area with goal number 7. So brief update, not a lot of significant changes. But again, the objective of this is to keep this in front of the board every 6 months prior to the fire chief's biannual reviews. And so that he can also get with his direct reports and kind of see where we're at on moving in a strategic direction. So with that, Chief, I'll turn it over back to you and any questions that the board may have.
Semi-annual is the word you're looking for, Ron.
Sorry.
So yeah, there's a lot of focus put into our COVID response, both through the community and the department, and Chief Howell getting getting fire prevention stood back up to where we can work with the customers that are coming through the door. As we see that that demand is stayed ever present. So as we get more back into a normal business flow, get that objective, we've had those objectives dealing with the brand identity of PFA, and that's just that's also an evaluation that that peer teams look for in their evaluation of the organization when they come. And I would like to tell you that is that late last week, we had a meeting with the peer team who will be doing their evaluation for accreditation via Zoom. One of the things that I guess one of the advantages that COVID, the disadvantage was they were supposed to have been here in June, early June. But that's a disadvantage, but the advantage is we're able to have discussions about some of the things they're looking at in our documentation now, which make the site visit shorter. And also more concise on things that they really want to dial into. We had a great meeting with them, and they've looked at those response time changes that we talked to you about. They really were dialed into that and looking at how we are prioritizing our calls, where the critical calls or where we're really trying to meet our benchmarks on response times, where seconds make a difference is what's important for that. So that was a good discussion. I just wanted to give you an update because that ties into this.
Great. Thank you. So are there any questions on the dashboard or Chief Sims' report?
Kristen, I don't have any questions. I just, again, thanks. I do appreciate the fact that we have this fairly regularly, and just keeping it front and center, I think is a good plan. So thank you very much, Ron and Chief. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? I have a question about the restaurants kind of moving into, you know, more public spaces, and kind of, are there any issues that have arisen for PFA regarding expanding the footprint kind of these restaurants and moving out into spaces?
I would defer that to Chief Howell, but we have been meeting with the folks at planning at the city and the building department, and then Chief Howell can address that as well.
Great.
Yes, and thank you. I just wanted to let you know that from really the conceptual inception of going into the streets, we've worked with the city to make sure that we do have access for emergency vehicles. We do have access around buildings to get into those spaces, to get the systems. And also, to the city's credit, a lot of those issues were discovered very early. And so at this point, we really don't have any concerns or compromises to service to those areas.
And when Chief Howell talks about systems, just so the board's clear, is that's fire protection systems. So sprinkler systems or alarm systems and all that, we make sure that we still have access to them to be able to. A sprinkler system provides that quick response, but if the incident continues, we have to have the ability to connect our fire apparatus to those sprinkler systems. So we make sure that we have access to those portions of the building as well.
Yes, and thank you, Chief.
I guess the only thing that I would add, Chief, is that, you know, I appreciate Kristen asking the question, and, you know, are there any unique business impacts on PFA? I will let everyone know that businesses already, a lot of the restaurants downtown and others are saying, we love this, our customers love this. So don't be surprised next season, post-COVID, next, you know, spring, summer, if businesses are asking to continue this, because they're getting great feedback and enjoying the outdoors. So, you know, I've shared that with our planning staff and Chad in engineering, and I'm not making a statement whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I just want you to know that, you know, you ought to be watching closely to see if there are any longer term concerns, because I think it's going to be an interest that, you know, we're going to hear more about, which, you know, on the surface, from my perspective, is good. The more we can get people outside and you know, near the right of way, and I think is a good thing. But just heads up on that.
Appreciate that. Okay. Oh, we lost Kristen's. I don't know if we lost Kristen. I think we might have lost our
Yeah,
chair.
she looks frozen.
Yeah, she said her screen is frozen. She just texted me.
Okay. Well, I guess if we're ready to move to the next thing, if Kristen needs to jump back, we can. Maybe she's back.
Who is our vice chair, Chief?
Chief Mike DiTullio.
I am?
Yes, you are, Ed.
Well, let's,
Congratulations.
yeah, a promotion I never even wanted. Well, let's move forward then. Is there
The next item?
next item? That's a big deal here. I think we need to spend some time on. So Tom, go ahead and share with what's happening.
Yeah, I'll introduce this, and we'll need to get Kristen back once we get to board action, because this does require board action and by our IGA.
There she is.
There she is. All right.
Sorry,
Kristen,
I
are you-
apologize. All of a sudden, I had, yeah. I've had good internet connectivity for a while, so it was bound to die on me at some point.
Yeah, that happens, doesn't it? Are you ready to move on? Kristen,
Yes.
moving on
Yes.
to.
Is everyone ready to move on? Sorry.
I'm going to turn it over to Ann to start the discussion on the PFA defined contribution pension plan.
Great.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Dave mentioned yesterday at our district board meeting that he really hoped you didn't have to understand all these documents, and I assure you, you don't. We have on the line our legal counsel for the pension board, George Tsai. He is that phone number that you see on your screen, and he's been.
Everybody. Hey, George.
He's been working closely with Kirsten and I and the team over at the city to implement these changes in our defined contribution pension plans. So what's going on here is that the city about a year ago put the administration of its pension plans up for bid, and they have been managed by ICMARC for about 30 or 40 years. It was well past time for those administrative services to be put out for bid. The city selected Nationwide to be its new administrator. And in making that conversion, we've really found that there were a lot of documents that either didn't exist or were not really up to standards, and we wanted to put them into formats that would work for Nationwide to be able to administer them for us. So that's why you see so many documents in front of you on this list. They break down into two groups. The fire chief's plan, which is really just Tom's plan. He's the single participant in that plan. And the various documents to arrange for his plan to be moved from ICMA to Nationwide. There really are no changes in these plans other than getting up to current IRS standards and stating them in the way that the IRS wants to see them. There's not any change in the contribution amounts, in the contribution limits, anything like that would be of concern. They are just changes to get in line with what both Nationwide and the IRS want. Same thing is true with the new and old hire plans, with the exception that we went through and combined these two plans in these documents. We've had an old hire plan and a new hire plan. They are overseen by the pension board, the PFA pension board, which is made up of 3 employees and 2 representatives of management on the new hire plan. And on the old hire plan, we only have 1 current employee who is active in that plan and a small handful of people who are retired in that plan. And so we had a board for that with 1 employee representative and 2 management representatives. The decision was made to combine those 2 plans so that we weren't trying to manage 2 separate plans and yet do the same thing on both of them. We're concerned because these plans are really closed plans at this point. No new employees will be coming into them. If you remember when we made the change to FPPA last year for all new employees, that created these 2 plans as closed plans. So going forward, we wanted to streamline them, make them as easier to administer by only having 1 board and combining the 2. So there are a number of agreements and documents that implement those changes, as well as setting a service agreement between PFA and the city to administer the plans for us. And they do that through the payroll and benefits offices at the city. So this formalizes that relationship. That's been how we've managed these plans all along, but never with an agreement. So now this puts all that in place. So that's the 20,000 foot view of this. George, is there anything that you would add to this for the board that they should be aware of in reviewing these documents and not expecting them to understand all the ins and outs of them, but we have reviewed all of them. George has reviewed all of them, wrote most of them. George, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just a couple things, and thanks, Sam. That's all accurate. On the Chiefs plan first, I guess we should mention. So on both of these plans, our intent was to carry over the exact same terms that are in the existing documents. For the Chiefs plan, we did that with the exception of 1 term, which we changed. The one change to the Chiefs plan was we changed the normal retirement age, or excuse me, not normal retirement age. We changed the age to take an in-service distribution. It previously was listed as age 70 and a half on the current ICMA documents, and we changed that to retirement age, which is age 50 or 20 years of service. So we did that just to keep that in line with the terms of the old hire, new hire plan. 70 and a half is kind of an unusually high age to take an in-service distribution. So that was the only change on the Chiefs plan side. Other than that, all of the terms stayed the same. On the old hire, new hire plan side, we made just a couple minor changes going forward to conform to what I believe are best practices in the retirement plan world. And those changes are basically just with respect to plan loans. Currently, that plan allows participants to take up to 5 loans at a time, which is kind of a high number to allow people to take. And so we decided to change that threshold, that limit to 2 loans going forward. So that's not going to impact anyone with existing loans. It's just people taking loans out going forward. And then we also implemented some loan relief under the CARES Act, which is the federal legislation in response to coronavirus that gives people with outstanding loans some relief in repaying those loans during 2020 if they're under financial duress due to coronavirus. So those are kind of the minor changes that we made to those plans going forward. Other than that, we kept the terms the same. Obviously, because we're combining the 2 plans into one, the fact that there used to be 2 boards will be, those boards will be combined into 1 board going forward. We tried to make the representation of employees versus employer on that board as similar as possible to what it is currently going forward. And those terms governing who's on the board and how the Board of Trustees meets and votes on stuff, that's all contained in the bylaws that were forwarded by Kirsten. And then the second thing I just wanted to mention was last week, I guess it was 2 weeks ago through last week, we had administered a participant election as is required under state statute and in the terms of the plans to have participants approve these changes. And Kirsten has the exact numbers, but both old hire and new hire plan participants voted in favor of all of the changes in excess of the 65% threshold needed. And so at this point, we do have participant approval of these proposed changes. So that's all I have to add for now.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions on this item? No. Quiet group today. So we need a motion to approve this. Is that right?
Yes.
Kristen?
Go ahead, Darren.
Let me just say one thing. I mean, and I'm not sure to what extent Dave and Mike, you all talked about this at your meeting, and you know, maybe the big question people are asking is why? Why would we change from ICMA-RC to nationwide? And you know, that was a what I call a durable partnership for over 45 years that we've had with ICMA. You know, some of the objectives that we wanted to look at as a city, and I know that this is, you know, it's a big deal changing and from a long-term provider to a newer one, you know, in this time. And I wasn't super excited about it when we first started talking about it, but as we went through and over the last few years have systemically evaluated our various relationships. And I know Mike Tutulio, Mike, you might have even been here. I don't know what specific date you were here versus the city, but this is a long-term relationship. But we went in and had outside review of our relationship with ICMA-RC. They've been an amazing partner. But you know, some of the objectives we were trying to accomplish was, you know, some of our younger, newer workforce members trying to see greater investment in retirement, and you know, how was ICMA-RC doing relative to the market? So we did go out to a competitive process. We did choose nationwide. It's been a big change process. But I hope that what you'll see is more people investing greater amounts, and that nationwide has really strong education programs. And then also some of the mobile flexibility and tools that are available, you know, just were very attractive. And so this wasn't something that we just jumped into and said, hey, let's change providers. This was something that we, you know, in sort of a systemic review of all of our major relationships, and through a competitive process found that this is a better direction to go. So, you know, to you know, people like Ann and others who've been trying to process this change in the organization, and I know it can be traumatic, but you know, it was important for us to evaluate this, and we think we have a better future as a result of this change. So again, I'll acknowledge it was a very, very hard change for me, or has been, because of you know, I've been with ICMA-RC for well over a quarter century. But I think at the end of the day, we're really setting our city colleagues and PFA colleagues on a better foundation moving forward. So it wasn't just change for change's sake. There was a compelling business reason, I think, to do this, and through that extensive process well over a year-long process led by Mike Beckstead and Teresa Roach, our Chief Human Resources Officer, we are where we are. So I don't think I've ever shared that context at PFA. And Mike, I know that you have you probably have a long-standing relationship, I know, with ICMA. I'm not sure about RC, but if you want to talk more about it in detail, I'd be happy to share some more context offline if you'd like.
Yeah, well, that started in 1972 with ICMA, so that's how long it goes back. And are they cheaper? Is Nationwide cheaper than ICMA, or is it about the same fee cost?
They do actually have a lower fee structure for employees on the amount that's retained on people's investments. So that's a big factor.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you guys looked it over carefully. ICMA has been a good partner for at least me, and hopefully you too, Darren.
Yes.
I know you were on the board there for a while, and so it's a big change, but it's been an important part of the employee relationship, you know, so. I'm
Yeah.
sure you looked at it carefully, and I trust your judgments. So.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Darren, for the addition. Dave, did you have something?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that I have a nationwide account. I remembered this last night while I'm laying awake thinking about this. And
This
I
should
think I
put you to
probably need
sleep,
to
Dave.
abstain. What's that?
I said, this should put you to sleep. I don't
Yeah,
know.
right. I know it. It did, but during the day. No, I think I better abstain from the vote. I'm sure it won't affect anything, but it probably avoid any question of conflict of interest or anything like that. I'll be abstaining.
So just to clarify, Dave, this is not none of these actions are a vote to go to nationwide.
Oh, they're not? Okay.
No, the decision to go to nationwide is separate from this. This is to get our documents in line with their administrative systems. I don't want to tell you how to abstain,
Okay.
but I just want to be clear that this is not a vote to go to nationwide or not go to nationwide.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then I can vote then. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, any other comments?
I just question, is that a board decision or is that an administrative decision to go to nationwide?
That was a decision that was made at the city, you know, we've worked really hard to make sure that we are trying to be as much like the city as we can be. I think it would have been a substantial problem if we had decided separately to try and stay with ICMARC. I'm not saying it would have been impossible, but it was really an agreement on our part to follow their lead and go to nationwide with them. The board, the pension board did have the opportunity to hear from Nationwide. They came and did a presentation and shared their education programs, their fee structures, and the pension board agreed that they wanted to pursue moving to nationwide as well. So even though we didn't, as PFA, make that decision, we agreed to not ask the city to make a separate plan for us. I think administratively that would have been a big issue and maybe impossible.
And just to be clear, Mike, we have a pension board members of the plan that's who makes these decisions. It's not an administrative decision on our part whatsoever. It's that pension board, and I'm just a member like everyone else, and I'm not on the board. We have elections on a regular scheduled basis to fulfill that, and then they put it to the vote of all the members.
Great. All right, anything else on this item? Is there a motion to, I guess we're moving the resolution to approve the pension plan changes and authorize me to execute documents. Is there a motion? Sorry, was there a motion?
So moved. I'm sorry, I was waving to a gentleman in my office.
Oh, okay.
So that was a motion.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So there's a motion and a second on the resolution to approve the pension plan changes and authorize the board chair to execute documents to implement the changes. So any other further discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And thank you, everyone. The next item, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth on my screen. So next item, briefing papers and other business. Any comments or questions on briefing papers or other business you want to bring before the board?
Yeah, I have just the really good news item is our burn building is completed. We have a couple of other hoops we have to jump through with the county, and one is a landscaping plan, which is anything we put landscaping wise out there is going to get either ran over, ran into. It's as you can see in photos, it sets on concrete. We're very proud of this. Chief Garcia, Chief McLean, Chief DeBar have done a fantastic job working with Draeger, who is the vendor of the prop, along with Brinkman Construction to get it constructed. And we have been allowed to do some test burns, and they're very, very excited for the ability that it gives us to give good quality simulation training to our firefighters. And of course, they love live fire training. So we're excited to get it kicked off, and we held our graduation for 5 recruits on Friday, right in front of us. So it was a good backdrop for that. And Chief McLean and DeBar are both here to answer any questions you might have about that, but that's a really good news item.
Great.
And I might remind you that we saved millions by doing that instead of going back to a concrete building that we've had in the past, which would have been at least $1 million extra. Probably much more than that. So I really appreciate their vision and foresight to push us in that direction.
Yes, those millions will come in handy.
Absolutely.
Any other any questions on that, or anything else on the briefing papers? Seeing none, we will move to correspondence. Any comments on correspondence? I just will just always register that I am jealous of all the nice correspondence. The correspondence that I receive is not as nice. And so good work, PFA, firefighters, and chiefs. And someday I'll be in a business maybe where people maybe slightly more appreciative, maybe, I don't know.
That's not always true. For the record, she received some nice messages as well. Don't let her fool you. But many are maybe a little more critical than
yes. Well, you know, it's public engagement. It's people being involved in the system. It's right. That's important too. So,
well, you can always retire and never get any kind of complaints.
I'm not going to do that. That would be, I'm not going to fold yet there. Thanks, Mike. You stuck with me for a little bit longer. So I think that we, if there's no other business, I think that we have a motion to go into executive session. I'm looking for that.
It's on page 270 of the packet.
Yep. All right.
So, Kristen?
Yes?
You'll get a message from me here in a moment to join the executive session.
Okay.
And then Kirsten will leave this meeting open until we come back.
Okay. So we're kind of, so the idea is to mute and turn off videos and go into a new
Into a
room.
different Zoom. Into a different Zoom. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Do we have to do anything, Ann?
You'll get an email here in a moment.
So we have to leave this meeting?
Yeah, you do have to leave this meeting and then just click on the link to rejoin after you leave the executive session.
Okay, so we'll leave
Then we
this
click
meeting.
back on this link again to get back into this.
Correct.
Yes. All right.
Okay, I have to sign off to open that other one. So
Sure, go ahead. See ya, Ann.
message from me here in a moment.
So I guess I can go ahead and make this motion to, so as permitted by Colorado Revised Statute, Section 24-6-4024B, I move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of receiving advice of legal counsel on matters related to Local 1945.
Second.
Okay, there's motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, all opposed. All right, motion passes, and we will be moving into executive session, and we will be back later to close out this meeting. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Coming out of executive session then.
Yeah, this is just a certification that the executive session constituted communication and was not recorded pursuant to 24-6-402 subsection 4B.
Thank you. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.